The moment you stop chasing her, something subtle but powerful shifts inside her. And if you're listening closely right now, this is where everything you thought you understood about attraction quietly turns upside down, because silence doesn't feel empty to her. It feels loud. And in that sudden quiet, her mind starts racing to fill the gap you left behind, replaying your presence, your absence, and what it suddenly means about her place in your world. When you were always there, always initiating, always reaching out, her mind had no reason to wonder, no reason to search, no reason to lean forward emotionally, because certainty is comfortable, but it is also dull, and the human nervous system is not wired to crave what feels guaranteed. So when you stop chasing her, the first thing she thinks is not anger or relief, but confusion, a subtle tightening in the chest that whispers something has changed, because consistency trains the brain to expect reward. And when that reward is removed, the mind doesn't relax, it activates. She begins asking herself quiet questions she never needed to ask before, wondering why you're suddenly distant, wondering if she misread something, wondering if she said too much or too little, wondering if someone else has your attention now. And in that wondering, something crucial happens. Because attention moves inward and emotional investment begins to grow. Her thoughts start circling back to moments with you, replaying conversations, rereading texts in her memory, noticing tones and pauses she once ignored, because absence sharpens perception and creates meaning where routine once flattened it. This is where desire begins to change shape, because desire is not born from being chased. It is born from being chosen. And when you stop chasing, you remove the proof that she assumed would always be there, forcing her to confront a deeper question about her own value in your eyes. She may tell herself she doesn't care, that she enjoys the space, that independence feels good. But the body often reacts before the ego can keep up, and that reaction shows up as restlessness, as curiosity, as a strange pull to check her phone a little more often, not because she misses your messages, but because she misses the feeling of being desired without having to think about it. When that feeling disappears, her subconscious begins negotiating, trying to understand whether this loss is temporary or permanent, and whether it reflects something about you or something about her. This is the moment when attraction quietly flips direction, because while you were chasing, her energy could stay relaxed, receptive, even passive. But now the emotional tension shifts back toward her, and tension is the raw material of intimacy. She starts noticing you differently, not as a constant presence, but as a variable, as someone who can choose distance, and that choice subtly elevates your perceived value, not because you are playing a game, but because autonomy signals strength, and strength triggers respect at a biological level long before logic has a chance to intervene. Her mind begins to test stories to soothe the discomfort, telling herself you are busy, or tired, or distracted. But when those stories don't fully calm the unease, a deeper thought emerges, one she may not say out loud. The thought that maybe you were more important to her sense of being wanted than she realized. This is where emotional memory becomes charged, because every shared laugh, every intimate glance, every moment of connection now carries weight, not as something ongoing, but as something that could be slipping away. And the human brain is far more motivated to protect what feels at risk than to maintain what feels secure. As she sits with that realization, she may feel a subtle pull to reestablish connection, not necessarily by chasing you outright, but by opening doors, by posting something meant to be seen, by casually reaching out, by finding reasons to cross your mental space again. Because when you stop chasing, you force her to decide whether she wants to meet you halfway or let the connection fade. That decision point is where true intimacy begins or ends, because intimacy is not built on pursuit alone. It is built on mutual emotional movement. And your stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting her own level of desire back at her. Beneath all of this thinking lies a more vulnerable layer, one that whispers fears she may not consciously acknowledge. Fears of being forgotten, replaced, or deemed unimportant. And it is not cruelty that awakens these fears, it is contrast. The contrast between being pursued and being left to sit with her own feelings without external validation. In that space, she begins to feel the emotional weight you once carried for her, the reassurance, the attention, the sense of being special. And when that weight shifts back into her hands, she must either carry it herself or reach out to share it with you. This is why stopping the chase is not about manipulation or withdrawal, but about restoring balance. Because chasing too long teaches her that she never has to choose, never has to risk, never has to reveal her own investment. And when you step back, you invite her into the emotional arena instead of performing alone inside it. The most powerful thing she starts thinking in this phase is not whether you like her, but whether she likes you enough to move, enough to feel, enough to step forward without being pulled. And that thought alone can transform casual attraction into something deeper, more charged, and more real. As her mind settles into this new dynamic, a deeper layer of thinking begins to surface. One that has less to do with you specifically and more to do with how she experiences herself in relation to you. Because when the chase stops, the emotional spotlight moves off your effort and onto her internal state, and that can feel unexpectedly intense. She starts to feel the absence not just as a lack of attention, but as a loss of emotional orientation, because your pursuit once provided a rhythm, a sense of being anchored in someone else's desire. And when that rhythm disappears, the nervous system looks for something to replace it. This is when she begins scanning her emotional landscape, asking herself whether she actually misses you, or whether she misses how you made her feel about herself. And that distinction matters, because it forces her to confront her own motivations honestly. Attraction thrives in uncertainty, but emotional growth is triggered by self-reflection, and your withdrawal creates both at the same time, which is why her thoughts can swing back and forth between longing and resistance, curiosity and pride, desire and defensiveness. She may feel an urge to reclaim control, not necessarily by pulling you closer, but by convincing herself she doesn't need you. Because independence feels safer than vulnerability when the ground shifts beneath her feet. Yet even as she tells herself she's fine, something in her body remembers the emotional attunement you offered. The way being pursued softened her edges and allowed her to relax into being seen. And that memory doesn't disappear just because she chooses not to think about it. Instead, it becomes a quiet undercurrent, influencing how she responds to other people, how she measures their attention against yours, how quickly she loses interest when connection feels too easy or too forced. This is where comparison begins, often unconsciously. Because once she has experienced a certain quality of presence, the absence of it becomes noticeable elsewhere, and your silence becomes a reference point rather than a void. She starts noticing that others may desire her, but not in the same way, not with the same emotional texture. And that realization can spark a subtle form of longing that is less about ego and more about resonance. At the same time, she begins testing the edges of your absence, watching for signs that you still exist in her emotional orbit, because uncertainty creates vigilance. And vigilance keeps you psychologically present, even when you are physically or digitally distant. She may reread old messages not for their content, but for their tone, searching for clues she once overlooked. Because when meaning is no longer being actively created, the mind goes back to reinterpret what already exists. In doing so, she may discover emotional depth she didn't fully register at the time. Because attention sharpens perception, and absence intensifies memory. This is also the phase where desire becomes internalized, shifting from something stimulated by your actions to something generated by her own imagination. And imagination is often more powerful than reality because it fills gaps with idealized versions rather than imperfect truth. She may start wondering what you're thinking, whether you miss her, whether your silence is intentional or effortless. And that wondering subtly positions you as someone with agency rather than someone seeking approval. Agency is attractive because it signals self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency invites respect before it invites intimacy. As respect grows, so does the potential for deeper connection. Because attraction without respect fades quickly, but attraction built on respect has a different gravity. She may feel moments of irritation toward you for making her think this much, because emotional labor can feel unfair when it is uninvited. Yet that irritation is often a mask for vulnerability, a way to protect herself from admitting that she cares more than she expected. When she notices herself caring, another internal dialogue begins, one that asks whether reaching out would restore balance or expose her to rejection. Because the risk has shifted, and now she is the one who would have to move without a guarantee of response. This is the emotional crossroads your stillness creates, because by stepping back, you return choice to her, and choice is where authenticity lives. If she reaches out, it is not because she is being chased, but because she is choosing connection. And that choice carries more emotional weight than any amount of pursuit ever could. If she doesn't reach out, the silence continues teaching her something equally important, that attraction unreturned fades into reflection, and reflection becomes closure or longing depending on how honestly she listens to herself. In this stage, what she starts thinking most intensely is not about strategy or power, but about emotional truth. About whether the connection mattered enough to risk vulnerability, and whether she is willing to meet you in the space where desire is mutual, rather than assuming days, time stretches on, and the initial emotional turbulence settles. Her thinking evolves into something quieter, but far more revealing. Because what remains after the confusion and comparison fades is the truth she can no longer distract herself from. She starts to feel the emotional echo of your absence, not as anxiety anymore, but as clarity, because when the nervous system calms, the heart speaks more honestly. She begins to recognize that the chase once protected her from having to examine her own level of desire, and now that protection is gone, leaving her face to face with a simple but uncomfortable question about whether she genuinely wants you, or merely enjoyed being wanted. This realization can be humbling, because it strips away performance and leaves only feeling, and feeling cannot be negotiated with logic. If what she felt was shallow, it begins to dissolve naturally, replaced by neutrality or acceptance. But if what she felt was real, it deepens in your absence rather than disappearing. Because true attraction does not need constant stimulation to survive. It needs space to reveal itself. In that space, she may feel a slow, burning pull rather than an urgent craving, a desire rooted in respect rather than validation. And this is the kind of desire that leads to intimacy instead of dependency. She starts imagining what it would feel like to reconnect now, not from habit but from intention, and that imagined reconnection feels different, heavier, more meaningful, because it would require her to show up emotionally rather than simply receive attention. At the same time, she becomes more aware of her own boundaries, noticing how your step back forced her to locate herself instead of leaning into your pursuit. And this self-location is critical, because intimacy between two people who know where they stand is far deeper than intimacy built on imbalance. She may feel moments of sadness, not because she lost you, but because she lost the illusion that attraction is effortless when someone else is doing all the work. And that sadness is part of emotional maturity, the recognition that connection requires mutual risk. As she processes this, her thoughts about you become less reactive and more reflective, less about what you are doing and more about what she wants to do. And that shift is the true turning point. If she decides to reach out now, it is no longer driven by fear of loss or ego discomfort, but by a genuine desire to explore something real, something chosen, something alive. If she chooses not to, she carries forward a deeper understanding of herself, knowing that the absence of your chase revealed the limits of her interest without drama or manipulation. Either way, the silence you created served a purpose, not to provoke, punish, or control, but to restore truth to the dynamic, because truth cannot emerge when one person is constantly pulling and the other is constantly responding. When you stop chasing, you stop performing desire and start embodying self-respect. And that self-respect is what invites a woman to meet you emotionally rather than remain passive. What she starts thinking in the end is not about how to get your attention back, but about whether she wants to step into a connection where desire moves both ways, where intimacy is co-created rather than extracted. And that is the final insight that ties everything together. That stopping the chase does not guarantee you will get her, but it guarantees something far more valuable. That whatever happens next is real, chosen, and grounded in mutual emotional presence, rather than pursuit alone.